Russian President Vladimir Putin delivered a stark and uncompromising message to the international community, unequivocally reiterating the fundamental condition Moscow demands for any resolution to the conflict in Ukraine. Speaking during a lengthy address at the Kremlin, broadcast across Russian state media and closely monitored globally, Putin framed these demands not as negotiation points but as essential prerequisites for peace, effectively dismissing recent diplomatic murmurs and placing the onus squarely on Kyiv and its Western allies. The core tenets of his statement represent a maximalist position, largely unchanged from the war's outset but articulated with renewed vigor and perceived leverage following recent battlefield dynamics. President Putin emphasized that the current territorial reality on the ground must be recognized as the new baseline. This explicitly includes the formal annexation by Russia of the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia regions in their entirety, encompassing areas currently under Ukrainian military control. He declared any discussion of Ukraine regaining these territories through negotiation or military means as fundamentally unacceptable and off the table. Putin stated categorically that Russia's sovereignty over these regions, as formalized in the September 2022 annexation treaties, widely condemned internationally as illegal, is non-negotiable and constitute an absolute foundation for any future talks. Further cementing this position, Putin demanded legally binding, ironclad guarantees that Ukraine would forever abandon its aspirations to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. He portrayed NATO's potential eastward expansion to include Ukraine as an existential threat to Russian security that Moscow would never tolerate. This demand extends beyond mere neutrality. Putin insisted on Ukraine adopting a formal constitutional amendment enshrining its non-aligned status, effectively barring it from any military alliance perceived by Moscow as hostile. Crucially, he stipulated that this neutrality must be underwritten by legally binding security assurance from major Western powers, implicitly including the United States. These assurances, he argued, must explicitly preclude any future NATO membership pathway for Ukraine and significantly restrict Western military involvement, including arms supplies and training programs. The Russian leader castigated the West, accusing it of using Ukraine as a proxy to wage a hybrid war against Russia, aiming to inflict a strategic defeat. He warned that continued Western military support only prolonged the suffering of the Ukrainian people and increased the risk of a broader, potentially catastrophic confrontation. Putin dismissed Western sanctions as ineffective and claimed they were consolidating Russian society while accelerating the development of domestic industries and strengthening economic ties with non-Western partners. A central pillar of Putin's demand is the complete demilitarization of Ukraine. He elaborated that this goes far beyond the cessation of hostilities. It requires the wholesale dismantling of Ukraine's current military and security infrastructure, which he characterized as having been built up under Western direction specifically to threaten Russia. Putin specified that this entailed drastic limitations on Ukrainian military capabilities, including severe restrictions on the types and quantities of weaponry Ukraine could possess, the size of its armed force, and the nature of its defense industries. He insisted that Ukraine must dismantle fortifications and military installations near the Russian border and within the newly claimed Russian territories. Furthermore, Putin explicitly demanded the removal of what he termed Nazi elements and Banderites from positions of power and influence within the Ukrainian state apparatus and military command structure. This familiar Kremlin narrative, equating the Ukrainian government with historical Nazi collaborators, served as both a domestic propaganda tool and a justification for the invasion. He linked this demand to the broader goal of denazification, which he presented as a core objective of the special military operation from its inception. The Russian president offered no specific on how this purge would be implemented or verified, leaving it as a nebulous yet non-negotiable condition. President Putin also addressed the status of Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014. He stated that the issue of Crimea is closed forever, reiterating the Kremlin's long-held position that the peninsula is an integral and inalienable part of the Russian Federation. He dismissed any notion of negotiations regarding Crimea's future, framing its incorporation into Russia as reflecting the will of its people, a claim rejected by Ukraine and most of the international community. Beyond territorial and military demands, Putin emphasized the necessity of protecting the right of Russian speakers and ethnic Russians residing throughout Ukraine, including in areas far beyond the current conflict zone. He alleged systematic discrimination and persecution by Kyiv, pointing to language laws and cultural policies as evidence. While not demanding autonomy explicitly for these regions in his latest speech, he insisted any settlement must include robust, internationally guaranteed protection for these populations, potentially creating mechanisms for Russian intervention based on perceived violations. Putin framed the entire conflict as a consequence of the West's disregard for Russian security concerns following the collapse of the Soviet Union and accused the United States and its allies of fostering instability in Ukraine through repeated political interventions. He portrayed Russia's action as defensive and necessary to correct historical injustice and ensure stable security architecture in Europe that acknowledged Russia's rightful place as a major power. The immediate reaction from Kyiv was one of categorical rejection and defiance. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking within hours of Putin's address, denounced the demands as the delusional ultimatums of a maniac who has lost touch with reality. He stated unequivocally that Ukraine would never surrender its territory, compromise its sovereignty, or abandon its constitutionally guaranteed path towards Euro-Atlantic integration. These are not terms for peace. They are a demand for capitulation, Zelensky declared. Ukraine will fight for every centimeter of its land. We will restore our territorial integrity within the internationally recognized border of 1991. Andriy Yermak, head of the presidential office, echoed this sentiment, calling Putin's speech a testament to Russia's imperial ambitions and its refusal to engage in genuine diplomacy based on international law. He emphasized that Ukraine's position remains unchanged. A comprehensive peace must be based on the full withdrawal of Russian forces from all occupied territory, including Crimea, and justice for war crimes. The Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a formal statement labeling Putin's demand as unacceptable, ultimatum-like, and aimed at the destruction of the Ukrainian state. They reaffirmed Ukraine's commitment to the principles of the UN Charter and the peace formula previously presented by President Zelensky, which includes the restoration of territorial integrity and the establishment of a special tribunal for Russian war crimes. The response from Western capitals was swift and uniformly critical. A spokesperson for the White House National Security Council stated, President Putin's so-called terms are a rehash of his discredited justification for an illegal war of aggression. They are completely detached from reality and the principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity enshrined in the UN Charter. The United States continues to stand firmly with Ukraine as it defends its freedom and democratic future. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, speaking at a press briefing, characterized the speech as a transparent attempt to freeze the conflict on Russia's term after failing to achieve its initial maximalist goals militarily. He added, the United States, alongside our allies, will continue to provide Ukraine with the support it needs to defend itself. True peace can only come when Russia withdraws its forces from Ukraine's internationally recognized territory. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg condemned Putin's demand as a blueprint for continued Russian domination and the denial of Ukraine's fundamental right to self-defense and self-determination. He reiterated NATO's unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and stated that the alliance door remains open, affirming that decisions on membership are for NATO and the aspiring country alone. Russia does not have a veto over Ukraine's choice, Stoltenberg asserted. The European Union High Representative Joseph Borrell described Putin's address as a cynical exercise in power politics, stating that the EU categorically rejects any peace dictated by the aggressor on the aggressor's terms. He emphasized that sustainable peace must respect Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. The EU remains committed to supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes, Borrell declared. Analysts widely interpreted Putin's forceful restatement of demands as serving multiple strategic purposes. Firstly, it appears time to influence the international narrative ahead of anticipated diplomatic engagement, potentially including the upcoming United Nations General Assembly sessions. By laying down maximalist markers, Putin aimed to set the parameters of any future discussion, forcing Ukraine and the West into a position of rejecting seemingly concrete peace terms. Secondly, it serves as a direct response to internal pressure. Despite tight control, maintaining domestic support for a prolonged war requires constant justification. Presenting the conflict as a defense against NATO aggression and framing the demand as a non-negotiable security essential reinforces the Kremlin's narrative for the Russian populace. Thirdly, it signals to Western audience experiencing varying degrees of war fatigue that Russia's position is immutable, potentially sowing discord among Ukraine's allies regarding the feasibility and cost of continued support. The uncompromising tone suggests Moscow perceives a current advantage, either militarily on the ground or politically within Western capital, allowing it to dictate terms rather than negotiate it. The demand for Ukraine's permanent neutralization and demilitarization is seen as a core strategic objective to ensure Ukraine remains a weak buffer state, incapable of posing a future challenge to Russian dominance in the region. The insistence on recognition of annexed territories aims to legitimize conquest and create irreversible fact on the ground, effectively redrawing the map of Europe by force. Putin's rhetoric leaves virtually no room for compromise, painting a picture where the only choice are Ukraine capitulation or continued, potentially escalating conflict. The implications for the trajectory of the war are profoundly negative. Putin's speech effectively extinguished any near-term hope for meaningful ceasefire negotiations or diplomatic settlement. By presenting demands he knows are completely unacceptable to Ukraine and its allies, he signals a clear intention to continue the military campaign, betting on Russia's ability to outlast Western resolve and Ukraine's capacity to resist. The hardening of position makes the prospect of a negotiated peace significantly more remote, pointing towards a protracted conflict characterized by continued attritional warfare. The emphasis on demilitarization and NATO exclusion underscore Russia's determination to prevent Ukraine from emerging as a strong, independent, Western-aligned state. This stance guarantees continued Western military aid to Ukraine, as accepting Putin's term would represent a catastrophic failure of Western security policy and a green light for further Russian aggression elsewhere. The speech also increased the risk of further escalation, as Putin framed the conflict in existential terms for Russia and warned darkly of consequences if the West continues its support. While avoiding explicit nuclear threats in this instance, the underlying message of heightened confrontation remains clear. For Ukraine, the speech reinforced the existential nature of the struggle, leaving no ambiguity that victory requires not just defending current lines, but liberating occupied territories against a foe determined to erase its sovereignty. Putin's forceful restatement of Moscow's term marks not a step toward peace, but a deliberate entrenchment of the fundamental disagreement driving the war, setting the stage for potentially even more violent and uncertain phase in the conflict. The international community now faces a stark choice: pressure Ukraine into accepting terms tantamount to surrender, or commit to supporting its resistance, and definitely in the face of an unyielding adversary. Many of my listeners, like 70%, have subscribed to my YouTube channel. And so many of you don't even know that you haven't subscribed. And that is actually what makes the show going. It's almost like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask again and again, because it enables us to grow and grow and grow. And we're going for the long haul here. And listen, if this is your first time listening to World Global Conflict, you don't have to subscribe. You guys, your first one's on me. But if you have watched this show before, it's like you are a freeloader now. So all I would ask you is, if you have seen this show before and you like it, help me, help my team here. Hit that subscribe and like button now, and we will continue to build the show for you. That I swear. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. That's all for me for today. I will see you soon. Bye for now.